Have you ever looked at a friend passionately engaged in a hobby and wondered, have I ever felt that way about anything? Do you find yourself scrolling through channels, apps, websites, searching for something, anything, that might make you feel something? Have you realized you can't remember the last time you were genuinely excited about anything? I've been there. I was there for so long, I didn't even realize I was there. And perhaps you are too. My name is Alex. I'm 34 years old. I have a good job in tech, a nice apartment, and a fulfilling social life. I'm not someone you'd look at and think, that person is struggling. But for years, I've been living with a strange emptiness, an absence of passion that I couldn't name until I overheard a friend talking about how they had lost connection with their hobbies. That's when I realized, I can't remember what I used to love. Not in a real, deep, consuming way. Not in a way that kept me up at night with excitement. Not in a way that made me forget to eat or forget the time. And I don't know when that happened. This is the story of how I lost connection with passion, why it happens to so many of us, and the path I found back. When I was a child, I loved everything. I collected rocks. Not precious gems, just ordinary stones I found on my way home from school. I washed them, categorized them, displayed them. I spent hours researching them in my parents' old encyclopedias. I imagined myself as a geologist, discovering hidden treasures in ordinary rocks. Then came my dinosaur phase. I knew the names of dozens of species, the eras they lived in, their eating habits. I drew them, dreamed about them, played with plastic models of them until the paint chipped off. Then music. I learned to play guitar at 12 and played until my fingers ached. I wrote clumsy songs, formed a terrible band with friends, and dreamed of standing on stage. I listened to favorite albums over and over until I knew every note, every lyric. But then, something changed. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a slow erosion. High school came, with pressure to fit in, to succeed, to plan for the future. College followed, with higher expectations, clearer goals. Then the first job, the first apartment, the first bills. And gradually, those hobbies, those passions, became luxuries I no longer had time for. My guitar was put away in the closet. My rock collection was boxed up and stored in my parents' basement. My dinosaur knowledge faded into trivia I occasionally shared at parties. I told myself this was part of growing up, that those passions were childish, and now I had more adult concerns. But the truth is, I didn't replace them with anything. I didn't find new, more mature passions. I just stopped being passionate, and I didn't even realize it had happened. I didn't realize something had been lost until an ordinary Tuesday evening, when I was having dinner with an old friend named Maya. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and I asked her about her life. Her eyes lit up as she talked about the pottery class she had joined. "I'm completely obsessed," she said. "I stay up late watching YouTube videos about techniques. I've turned my living room into a mini studio. My hands always have clay under the fingernails, but I don't care. I've never felt this way about anything." I smiled and nodded, but inside, I felt a strange wave of envy. Not because I wanted to do pottery, but because I wanted to feel the way she felt about anything. I wanted to have something that made my eyes light up like that. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you still playing guitar? I remember how much you used to love it." I laughed awkwardly. "Oh no, I don't have time anymore. You know, work and everything." "So what do you do for fun?" she asked. And I froze. What did I do? I watched Netflix. I scrolled through social media. I went for beers with friends and talked about work, politics, or the shows we were watching. But I didn't have anything I truly did. Nothing I created, nothing I explored, nothing I immersed myself in. "I guess I'm looking for something new," I said, feeling a strange emptiness spread in my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering, when did I stop loving things? When did I become a passive consumer of life rather than an active participant? And why didn't I even notice it had happened? I started noticing this in people around me. In conversations at the office, at parties, even with family. I began casually asking people, What are you passionate about? And I was surprised by how many people struggled with the question. I like watching movies, someone would say. I enjoy traveling, another would say. But when I dug deeper, what's the last favorite movie you watched? Or when was the last trip you were really excited about? There was often a pause, a distant look, and then an admission that it had been a while. I started researching this phenomenon and discovered there's a term for it: anhedonia. It's when you gradually lose the ability to feel pleasure or interest in activities you once enjoyed. It's often associated with depression, but it can also occur in what psychologists call hidden depression, when you're not fully depressed, but you're not really thriving either. I found a study showing that the average adult spends less than 20 minutes per day on activities they do purely for joy. 20 minutes out of 24 hours. The rest of our time? Working, doing chores, taking care of others, scrolling on phones, passively watching TV. Not bad things, but not things that make us feel alive either. I read about how our attention economy has reshaped our brains to crave quick, easy dopamine hits from social media and on-demand entertainment, making it harder to engage in activities that require initial effort before they yield rewards. I read about how our busy culture has turned free time into a guilty luxury, making us feel that if we're not always working or doing chores or improving ourselves in some way, we're wasting time. And I read about how disconnection from joy and passion doesn't just make our lives less rich, it can actually harm our mental and physical health. Joy isn't a luxury, it's a human necessity. All of this hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't just disconnected from my hobbies. I disconnected from an essential part of my humanity, and I wanted it back. So I started an experiment. I decided to spend a month trying old hobbies again and exploring potential new ones. Each week, I would dedicate at least 3 hours, just 3 hours out of 168, to engaging in an activity I did purely for the joy of it. The first week, I took my guitar out of the closet. The strings were rusty, and I'd forgotten most of the chords. My fingers ached after just 15 minutes. But there was something strangely familiar about the feel of the strings under my fingers. I found an online guitar course for beginners and started over from scratch. The second week, I signed up for a drawing class. I was never particularly good at drawing, but I'd always liked the idea of it. The class was not great. I was self-conscious, I was disappointed with my clumsy efforts, and I didn't go back for the second session. The third week, I tried gardening. I bought some houseplants and spent a Sunday afternoon potting them, learning about their needs, and arranging them around my apartment. I found I actually enjoyed caring for a living thing, even a small, silent one. The fourth week, I tried cooking, not cooking for survival, but cooking as a form of creativity. I chose a complex recipe I'd never tried before and spent an entire afternoon preparing it, enjoying the slow process, the feel of the knife cutting through vegetables, the smell of herbs and spices, the transformation of raw ingredients into something entirely new. Not all of these experiments were successful. I don't think I'll become an artist. But that wasn't the point. The point was that I was trying. I was actively engaging in my life again, instead of just letting it happen to me. And something started to shift. Not in one dramatic moment, but in a slow change, just like how I'd lost connection with my passions in the first place. I began to notice small moments of genuine joy. The satisfaction when I finally played a guitar passage without stumbling. The mild excitement when I noticed a new leaf on one of my plants. The pleasure of tasting a dish I had created from start to finish. I also started noticing subtle changes in other areas of life. I slept better. I found myself scrolling on my phone less. I had more to talk about in conversations beyond work and weather. But the biggest change was in how I experienced time. Before, days, weeks, even months seemed to pass in an indistinguishable blur. Now, time had more texture. I had things to look forward to, moments in the day I actually anticipated, rather than just trying to get through. I shared what I was doing with Maya, and she invited me to her pottery studio. I was terrible at it. My hands were too clumsy, and my first bowl looked like a squashed plate, but we laughed a lot. And there was something about creating a physical object from a shapeless lump of clay that touched a deep place inside me. You know what's interesting? Maya said as we were cleaning up. I had forgotten how important playing guitar used to be to you until we had dinner last month. It makes me wonder how many parts of myself I've forgotten. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I think we all have parts of ourselves buried under all the daily life. So how do we dig them up? She asked. It was a good question, and I'm not sure I have the answer. But I'm starting to think it involves asking the right questions. Not do I have time for joy, but how can I make joy an integral part of my life again? It's been 6 months since that conversation with Maya, and I won't say I've completely recaptured the intense feeling of passion I had as a child. I think perhaps that's part of growing up. Our emotions become more complex, less straightforward. But I have found something I'd lost for a long time: the ability to care deeply. The ability to immerse myself in an activity for its own sake, not because of how it will look on social media, or what it will add to my resume, or who it will impress. I still play guitar, though not as often as I'd like. I've given up drawing, but I've joined a book club, which I find I surprisingly love. I have a small garden growing on my balcony. And yes, I still watch Netflix and scroll through social media. I'm not a monk, but those activities are no longer my entire recreational life. I've learned that passion isn't always a roaring fire. Sometimes it's a small flame that needs nurturing and careful attention. It needs time and attention, two things we often feel we don't have enough of. But I've started to wonder if we really lack time and attention, or if we've just been taught to prioritize them in ways that don't serve our deeper happiness. If you, like me, have forgotten what it feels like to love something, I want to invite you to try a small experiment. Just 1 hour in the next week. 1 hour dedicated to an activity you do purely for the joy of it. Not to post on social media. Not because it's useful or productive. Just because it makes some part of you feel alive. Maybe it's an old hobby you've abandoned. Maybe it's something you've always wanted to try but never had the time for. It doesn't have to be something you're good at. It doesn't have to be something you'll stick with. It just needs to be something that sparks a small flicker of curiosity or joy. Because perhaps the answer to the question, "What did I used to love?" doesn't lie in the past. Perhaps it lies here, in the present, in the small choices we make each day to engage with our lives more intentionally, to remember that we are not just passive consumers of experience, but active creators of our own lives. I can't promise you'll find the intense passion you're craving, but I can promise that the act of looking for it, the simple act of opening yourself to the possibility of joy, is a journey worth taking for its own sake. So, what will you try for that 1 hour?